What influence did Frank Chodorov have on the Libertarian movement, including those of us at the Future of Freedom Foundation? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle, a show that y'all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for libertarianism. We've been doing that here at the Future of Freedom Foundation for around 32 years now, so you can come to our website at fff.org for probably just about every libertarian issue on the books. And I'm joined as I am every week by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who's been promoting and advancing the principal case for libertarianism for his entire life. Well, maybe not so long, since at least he was a teenager when he discovered libertarianism. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you. My only correction of you is that I like to say that I became an advocate of freedom on the day I was born.
Oh, and why do you say that?
Well, you see, first of all, the doctor picked me up on my little feet, turned me upside down, and slapped my bottom. And I cried out. And at that moment, I realized two things. The Mises was right, man acts. And the other one is, he did this without my permission. So this was a violation of the non-aggression axiom. And so from the moment I came popping out of that womb, I was a libertarian.
Yeah, but I mean, wouldn't you have been dead if he had not initiated force against you?
Well, I was lucky because he told my mother right afterwards that he did everything he could, but I pulled through anyway.
I see.
And what was worse, I later found out that the nurse got a few good ones in too.
Well, I want to apologize.
Truth statement. Those are Rodney Dangerfield jokes.
Oh. Okay, well, maybe we should just edit this out of the program. I apologize for taking y'all's time on this.
What a bad attitude. You know, my mother wouldn't breastfeed me. She said she liked me as a friend.
This sounds exactly like Rodney Dangerfield.
Exactly. Those are all his jokes. Yeah. I wanted to go ice skating. My father told me to go out on the pond when it warmed up. I told him I was getting tired of running around in circles. We nailed down my other foot.
Richard, you ought to go on stage. I think there's one leaving
Just
tomorrow.
Plagiarism. It's all Rodney Dangerfield, who I think was brilliant with those one-liners. And I'm seeing some type of creature moving in the background.
Where?
Behind you.
Are you
I'm looking at a hairy butt.
This could be a Demogorgon. Oh, it is. It's a Demogorgon. Come here, Cassie. Come here. You want to get on film? Huh? Well, she's not going to get on film, but let's
there she is.
There she is.
There she is.
Yeah, that's my princess.
Star is born.
Yeah. Okay, Richard, we're going to talk about a guy that's just been a big influence in your life and my life, and a guy that's really, I think, very little known in the libertarian movement, especially among younger libertarians. And that guy is Frank Chodorov.
Yes.
He's been a tremendous influence to many of the old-time libertarians. And I'll leave it to you to give the biographical context of Chodorov. But let me just start out by saying why he has been such a tremendous influence on me and the Future of Freedom Foundation. That, you know, the big debate in the libertarian movement, long time debate, still going on today, is over methodology, how to advance liberty. And one of the popular methods is, we got to go out and convert people. And so there's entire lectures on how to phrase your arguments and how to put things in the right context and how you're going to influence or convert people into becoming libertarians. And that had some attractiveness to me in the early days after I discovered libertarianism. But I finally realized, Richard, over the years that You can't convert people to libertarianism. I mean, I've got people that they're close family members. I mean, they're friends, they're relatives. They don't want to have anything to do with libertarianism. And it's not that they don't know what libertarianism is. They're fully aware of what it is. And it doesn't matter how great you can construct your sentences to explain libertarianism and defend it, they don't want to have anything to do with it. Most of them are ardent conservatives. So when that dawned on me, which dawned on me many, many years ago, that you can't convert people, and I thought, well, okay, let me look at my situation, my personal situation. And, you know, I happened to discover libertarianism through a series of principled essays that had been published by the Foundation for Economic Education. That turned my life around. I mean, I can say I was converted, but as you point out, I think I was born a libertarian. It was just discovering that I was a libertarian at that point. It was essentially in my DNA. And so then I came across this essay by Frank Chodorov that I think you may have recommended to me many years ago, where he says, our job is not to make individualists or libertarians. Our job is to find them. And so that's what the methodology of FFF is based on. It's on finding libertarians, people that are naturally disposed and who are attracted to the principled and compromising case for libertarianism. And so I figured, okay, well, what we're going to do at FFF, and I made this determination 32 years ago, is we're just going to put these sound ideas out there, not reform-oriented, because that keeps the infringements on tack, but paint the case for a genuinely free society. And then as people discover this, they'll say, that's how I believe, which is what happened to me. I said, wow, that's what I believe. And so by finding all these people across society, which can be a very small minority, you bring that gigantic shift, a paradigm shift that ultimately brings us the free society. And that's why Chodorov is such a giant influence on me, because at the foundation of that little sentence is the entire methodology at FFF of advancing liberty. Give us a little bit more information about Frank Chodorov, Richard.
Okay, Frank Chodorov was born in New York City in 1887. He died in New York again in 1966. As a young man, he grew up on the streets of New York City. He certainly wasn't a libertarian or an individualist at that time in the philosophical sense. He actually graduated from Columbia University as a young man. But then around that time, if I remember the details of his biography, he came across one of Henry George's books. Now, Henry George is probably most famous for an idea of what land is worth versus a house on the land, of what the government should tax or not tax. But enveloping George's notion of land and property values and a basis of taxation was a strongly classical liberal or libertarian case for free trade, unhampered market competition, and respect for individual initiative. So basically, Henry George was a strongly property rights, free market individualist who just happened to sort of a quirky view of how he viewed land speculation and land ownership. So setting that aside, which was important in influencing Frank Chodorov, as it had been the fellow we talked about last week, Albert J. Nock. As Chodorov says at one point, he read Henry George's works several times, and each time it reinforced his sense about this philosophy of freedom. But the upshot of it was, he wrote for several newspapers and magazines. He decided to make a life of sort of journalism. But in the, I guess it was the mid-1930s, he became the head of a Henry George School of Political Economy in New York City. And he remained the head of this school until 1942, when he was fired. He was thrown out. Now, why? Well, within the Georgist view of land and land speculation, this freedom school that he had was basically teaching seminars, courses for both young people and adults on the principles of classical liberalism, individual liberty, free markets, limited government, individual initiative, uh, uh, the competitive profit motive, but also from things that he had read and the influence of Albert J. Nock on him. He also became strongly not only non or anti-interventionist in domestic economic and social affairs, but non and anti-interventionist in foreign affairs as well. He believed that it was not the duty of government to attempt to influence, control, command, or restrict people in their peaceful and honest voluntary affairs at home, and nor should the government interfere with, intervene into, through either political or military or economic involvement in the domestic or international affairs of other countries, which also meant America avoiding foreign conflicts. Now, at first, in the second half of the 1930s, as tensions were emerging in Europe and the Japanese had been attacking China, given that Congress had passed and Franklin Roosevelt had signed neutrality laws, that is, the United States would not get involved in foreign wars, restrictions on America being sucked into foreign conflicts due to certain trading relationships. That was the sympathy of Americans at the time. But in 1941, following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, all of which Chodorov said was basically caused by Roosevelt's policies of cornering the Japanese with sanctions, sounds familiar, embargoes on oil, which the US also pressured the Dutch to not be exporting oil to Japan either, because the Dutch then were the colonial administrator of what today we call Indonesia, then known as the Dutch East Indies. And so the Japanese felt themselves in a corner and lashed out in the secret attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, however anti-war Americans were on December 6th, following December 7th, we're shocked, we're out, the Japanese have attacked us, secretly and without cause, we were innocent. Roosevelt has said we're innocent. We're going to teach them a lesson. So obviously the patriotic pro-war sentiment became virtually the position for a vast number of Americans in general, as well as in the media and the political structure. Chodorov remained anti-intervention. He said America should attempt to disengage itself from being sucked into the war, even following the Japanese attack. There should be some way to ameliorate this rather than America being drawn into a world war. And the Board of Trustees, teachers at this Henry George School of Political Economy in New York had gone on to the FDR war bandwagon. And so he was ousted. He was basically kicked out.
Wow.
And during the war years, he was publishing this, what is known as sort of a broadside, like a large 4-page sheet called Analysis. Really hard to find. It's never been reprinted. You can find some sort of like photographs of pages and articles through Google searches and YouTube. But there's very few of these things. Some of them got reprinted in later books of his that I'll mention. But these were brilliant analyses, not only on the misguided direction of Roosevelt's domestic policies, exacerbated by World War II wartime controls at home, production controls, wage and price controls, restrictions on personal freedom. He continued to attack America's aggressiveness and entangling war policies. So he had a very small readership, but it had an immense effect on a number of people. So then when the war ended in the late 1940s, early 1950s, he became a co-editor of a resuscitated magazine that in the 1920s, Albert J. Nock had published and edited a version of, and that is The Freeman. And The Freeman was a bi-monthly, it came out every other week, as sort of like a news magazine, an editorial news magazine. And the other co-editors were Henry Hazlitt and a woman named Susan La Follette. And fortunately, I think it is the Mises Institute has digitalized all those early 1950s issues of the Freeman. And even today, as insights into the history of the time, as well as interpretive analyses of policies in general from a libertarian point of view, they're brilliant pieces. But Chodorov is in particular in this context. He warns again about the Cold War, America being drawn into foreign affairs that will have the blowback of lost freedoms at home, both financially in terms of the cost of the Cold War and a diminished latitude and liberty of the people as the government becomes much more of a controlling and surveillance state. And that eventually brought about so many tensions among the co-editors and some of the regular writers of the Freeman that it basically was going to pass away out of existence, also because of lack of financial support, until William Buckley wanted to take it. What became National Review, he wanted that to be the Freeman if the Freeman could be bought by him. But what happened was, given the anti-war and very radically laissez-faire sentiments of people like Chodorov and Henry Hazlitt, basically the Freeman as a publication was sold to the Foundation for Economic Education in, I believe, 1956. And that's when Leonard Read's Foundation for Economic Education, FEE, took over it, and it became what the Freeman was for decades after that. And in the early part, the editor of this new FEE Freeman was again Frank Chodorov. He stepped down after a few years, and that's when Paul Poirot became the editor of the Freeman until well into the 1980s. But anyway, during this time, Chodorov writes these articles for the Freeman, other outlets, and he begins publishing a whole series of books. I'm just going to mention a few of them here. One of my favorite here is called The Rise and Fall of Society. He basically takes some themes that he was inspired from by Albert J. Nock, particularly Nock's book, Our Enemy the State, which came out in the 1930s. And he published this one, just reminding myself, in 1959. And basically it is showing that the entire history of America and the world can be defined by two conflicting patterns of forces in human events. Again, using Nock's phraseology, social power, which means the free actions of free men in a free society cooperatively for both and material and cultural development, and political power, when the state co-opts, restricts, commands, controls, dictates the actions of men, and uses its redistributive powers to benefit some at the expense of others, while centralizing its own control in political and bureaucratic hands. And this is the great battle in society. Shall men be free, or they shall be politically controlled? And he weaves this together into a story of world events and part of the history of America in a brilliant and unbelievably readable fashion. He was excellent. One of his two other books, if I can just mention these quickly, Jacob, is a series of essays called One is a Crowd. One is a Crowd. Now, as I like to say, this is a real individualist when being by yourself is being with too many. That's a real individualist. Wow, I'm by myself and I want to get away from it. So because it's too many. But this is called Reflections of an Individualist. And in fact, it is in this book that he reprints one of his essays, which I especially enjoyed, which you were referring to, in which he says, you could try to reform and win over the world, but not everybody is going to be responsive to having a spark lit in them about liberty. But what the purpose of teaching individualism or libertarianism is not to make individualists and libertarians, but to find them, to find those people who have something in them that will be responsive to and react positively, and we'll discover, yeah, that's what I've always believed. Now, the reason why he was so influential on me, I've read that, but it really didn't mean much to me until in the 1970s, when I was a young whippersnapper. I was a regional chairman of the recently founded Libertarian Party out in California. And being a regional chairman in the Sacramento area, that's still here, I would have to go out and meet people. I would give talks, obviously just relatively small crowds then, and possible supporters financially for Libertarian Party activities. But I would meet people from many walks of life. And I'll just use one example. I met a businessman who had come across a book by Harry Brown, not one of his investment books, but a book called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. Because he had gotten turned off by the corruption of politics, the hypocrisy of politicians, that nothing seems to succeed in the world of politics. After every election, it's basically business as usual in the statist and collectivist directions. So how could he just sort of get by through this maze of government trying to control you? And so he happened to find Harry Brown's book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. How do you transcend this and find your niches to be happy, successful, without being sucked into dead-end politics in the party sense, and have ways in the maze to avoid or minimize the government preventing you from being happy and prosperous. But in this story, if maybe some viewers have even heard of this book by Harry Brown, he basically says, why is it important to find freedom? Because a person should be free. The state should not be regulating, the state should not be controlling, the state should not be commanding or restricting. You should want to be free. And if this touches you, this is my ideas of how to go through the maze of statist, intrusive institutions to find those interstices in which you can have a peaceful and happy life and hopefully be, financially comfortable. And this fellow told me that he read this, and yeah, he was interested in the, how do I live, find these avenues. But yes, that's why I've always been disheartened by government and politics. Yes, yeah, the individual shouldn't be burdened. The individual shouldn't be restricted. The individual should be able to keep what he's earned. Okay, and that book, it suddenly clicked with him. And I would come across people in their own ways and from different influences who had read Ayn Rand, or had read Hayek, or had read Mises, or had read Knock, or even some people had heard of Chodorov. He was better known back then. Or had read the Freeman from FEE. But in many cases, whether they were interested in contributing or supporting a political party movement, all of them had discovered this idea. Yeah, this message, I have found in this message something that sort of clicked with me. Yeah, this is what I'm about: freedom and being a free person. And that told me that Chodorov was right, because there would be other instances in which I would talk to a crowd, some event in which I had been invited to make comments in behalf of liberty, and at that time the emerging Libertarian Party, and you could just tell they were turned off. The conservatives, what do you mean? The government shouldn't tell you what you could read and what sex position you can be in. We have to be virtuous. That's what government's for. And then the lefties, what do you mean income should be based upon what you earn? What about the poor? We have to redistribute. All these statists everywhere. And but then there would be all those who said yes, yes. And so that transcending politics or a political movement, all that follows afterwards. To search out these people for whom the liberty idea will be important. That lighting of a light bulb, or the clicking, and something next week. He also wrote a whole bunch of other things. A piece, I don't have my copy here, a pamphlet from, I guess would be the late 1940s, that greatly influenced Murray Rothbard. Murray Rothbard said he was a student at Columbia University, and he went into the university bookstore And he sees this pamphlet for sale by this guy named Frank Chodorov, and it's called Taxation is Robbery. Okay, taxation is robbery. And he reads this. Yeah, what is the government telling me that I can't keep everything I own? Yeah, that's it. That's it. And so that was a turning point, according to Murray Rothbard, in his life. But he also published in the late 1940s The Myth of the Post Office. What is the government doing in the postal business? It should be free and privatized, and you shouldn't be forced to pay for something if it's a service you don't want. Then he has another book, reading that taxing purpose, The Income Tax, the root of all evil. The income tax, the root of all evil. And the premise of this is that if when men have been free and honest and in involuntary association with their fellow human beings, what right has the government at the source of earning income to take it from those who have honestly earned it and arrogantly presume to know how best to spend it, redistribute it in ways not consistent with the values, desires, and improvements of the lives of those who have earned it by productive work, through serving their fellow man as the means of improving their own. Very much of an Adam Smith invisible hand sense there. And then finally, I will just mention, this came out from Liberty Fund a good number of years ago, but I highly recommend this. This is a group of excellent essays called Fugitive Essays, edited by an excellent libertarian named Charles Hamilton. And just so the readers can see this, well, what the hell does this weirdo look like? There's Frank Chodorov. There's Frank Chodorov. And you'll notice he's very politically incorrect. What is he holding in his hand? Oh no, a pipe. He smokes. Well, some of us would consider that happier days, when you could even ingest things without being considered a social pariah, even when people didn't like it. But anyway, so it's equally important to the themes that he talked about: individualism, free markets, these differences between political power and social power, challenging the very presumption that government should intervene at home as well as in abroad. What was the way he wrote? He was a natural writer, smooth, clear, anecdotal. He has another book that I didn't have my copy here, which is his autobiography, and called Out of Step, an autobiography of an individualist. And he explains how he came to these views, how he became disillusioned with various things, and how in thinking about them and starting to write, he developed this unbelievably lucid and clear style that if these things click with you, part of the reason is when you read him is that it's self-evident, it's natural, it's obvious. How could anyone think any differently like this? With an honesty and a humility that makes freedom seem to be the only ideal that a person of character and ethics and caring about their own status, as well as the improvement of men everywhere. How could they believe anything else than this? And he was a major influence on a generation of classic liberals, libertarians, individualists in the 1940s and 1950s and into the 1960s in his last years. And he's a forgotten hero, an inspirational hero of the freedom movement, whose contributions in spirit and ideal and persuasiveness should not be forgotten.
Yeah, that's an excellent summary of his life and his works. You know, when I mentioned that when I discovered libertarianism, it was through these 4 little books that the Foundation for Economic Education had published in the 50s, and I discovered them some 20 years later in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. And I'm 99% certain that Chodorov had essays in those little books called Essays on Liberty.
Yes.
And they were the hardcore, purest things that struck me. I mean, the way I look at it, Richard, is the state, primarily through the public schooling system, had encased me with this thick layer of indoctrination. And the power of those essays, including Chodorov's, was that it was able to shatter this concrete of indoctrination, and then I was able to recognize reality for what it really was. And then I started to understand the world. and why we have inflation and why we have poverty and so forth. And of course, it all orients toward the type of system that Americans and the rest of the world were adopting, the socialist system of the welfare state, the interventionist system of the warfare state. But it was guys like Chodorov that helped me to break through. And, you're right, is what I suggested earlier, that most Americans are not interested in freedom. Now, they think they're free. They think the welfare warfare state has brought them freedom. It's all part of the indoctrination. But when they discovered libertarianism, they're confused, because they'll ask us libertarians, what are you all about? And we'll say, well, we're trying to achieve a free society. What? Are you crazy? We're already free. We live in a society that's already free. Thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free. They exemplify Johann Goethe's famous quote, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." So when you put libertarianism in front of them, like, let's say, a speech that you were giving at the local Rotary Club or whatever, local community group, the probability is that 99% of the people or 98% of the people in there are going to say, oh, no, I don't want libertarianism. It's like what I said earlier about friends and relatives I have that they don't want anything to do with libertarianism. But there's always that possibility that one or two in that audience of 100 that says, oh, that's exactly how I believe. And this is what Chodorov was getting at, that we're looking for those one or two. Now, you may think, oh, well, what's one or two when the other 98 don't want it? But as we've learned throughout history, small minorities can sometimes shift an entire society but it has to be a minority of committed, knowledgeable individuals. Now, one of the interesting phenomena in the libertarian movement is that these are all people that have said, aha, yeah, I'm a libertarian. But interestingly enough, the libertarian movement is divided into two wings. They've got people that have been attracted to reform, so reforming the welfare warfare state. So those are the reform-oriented or conservative-oriented libertarians. And then there's people like us, like Chodorov and Henry Hazlitt and Mises, you and me and Rand, that say, no, no, no. In order to get freedom, you've got to dismantle all the infringements on liberty. If all you do is reform them, you haven't achieved freedom. And so we have a double task, Richard. Not only are we trying to find libertarians in society generally, but we're trying to find the ones who are the purists that say, I don't want to settle for reform. I want liberty. I want a genuinely free society. And that's why we do what we do. And it's because of heroes like Chodorov and Hazlitt and Mises and so forth, that we do what we do, because those guys inspired the heck out of us.
Yes. And just to reiterate, it can often seem like a lonely task. Last week when we were talking about Albert J. Nock, we had referred to his famous essay on Isaiah's job. You feel as if you're being sent on a mission that is despondently unwinnable. Oh, I talked to my friends about liberty and they all seem uninterested. Oh, they argue and they ask, well, what do you mean you believe in freedom and you don't believe in regulation? Don't you believe in laws? What do you mean you believe in freedom? You're going to leave the poor to die in the street? And it's like an unending task, particularly when some who make those types of arguments with minimal welfare state, degrees of government intervention in market relationships, and so on, are people who claim to be on our side of the fence. But the fact is that if liberty is to be won, the person to whom these ideas matter or come to matter or clicks with them, as we talked about, have to realize that all changes in society, as you were alluding to, have begun with minorities. A new idea has to originate in some individual human being's mind. And for that idea to have influence, that first individual has to have influenced and persuaded one other, and then another, and then another, and another. The upshot and final outcome of it is that you're cumulatively increasing the number of those who are touched and influenced by these ideas and see the value of it, the beauty of it, and the essential coherence of an uncompromising case for liberty. And if one then takes the time to understand the history and the workings of markets and the voluntary institutions of civil society, how virtually all the problems that often seem are legitimate concerns. Well, what about those who fall upon hard times not of their own making? Shouldn't we help our fellow man when it seems like, he could use it and would benefit from it? Well, charity, philanthropy, the history of these voluntary associations of the 19th century, and which continue in various forms into our own times. The power of the marketplace, that in fact the greatest destroyer of poverty, overcomer of poverty, is the productive rising standards of living for virtually all in the society that comes from an open, vibrant, and competitive market economy in which the creative forces of people's minds are set loose to apply themselves in ways that make new things, better things, less expensive things, in a competitive rivalry of growing excellence that results in virtually all in society escaping from the condition of poverty that not that long ago was the human condition for virtually all. So if one understands this and can reach an understanding of it, not only one's own mind, but then have an articulate ability to get others to see it, then one mind, and then another mind, and another mind. And what seemed like an impossible task seems like the possibility of a common group of thinkers in their various walks of life who, at the end of the day, can influence the direction of society.
Yeah, and I know we're out of time, but let me just wrap this up by pointing out one of the books that you brought up is Chodorov's book, The Income Tax Root of All Evil. I mean, if all I had done as a libertarian was hear arguments for tax reform and lowering income taxes and reining in the IRS, it would have had no attractiveness to me at all. It was when I read Chodorov's book that says, get rid of the entire income tax. You have a right to keep everything you earn. That's when it hit me. I said, wow, this guy's right on the right track. And then, of course, the flip side of it is, what about, because, you've got people sometimes saying, oh, yeah, get rid of the income tax. But the flip side is, what are the things that the income tax is funding? Let's talk about Social Security, Medicare, all the welfare state programs, all the warfare state programs, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, all the foreign interventionism. And all of a sudden, that's when people say, oh, well, wait, I don't want to talk about those things. I just want to talk about getting rid of the income tax. Well, the beauty of the libertarian philosophy in that purest sense was that it was willing to tackle the things that the income tax was funding. And that's what I found so attractive. And you alluded to this in terms of all the programs of mandatory charity, coercive charity, which really are not charity at all. And then ultimately challenging the entire existence of the national security state and talking about restoring a limited government republic type of governmental system to our land. So that's why it had such a powerful impact on me. And hopefully we will do the same, continue to do the same here at FFF by following in this tradition of Chodorov and Hazlitt and Mises and the purest libertarians. Okay, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all for tuning in. Remember, I got my new book that I highly recommend, needless to say. It is An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder story. Getting some really nice ratings and reviews. Be sure, after you read it, to leave ratings and reviews at Amazon. And look forward to seeing you all next week. Richard, as always, greatly enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for the great insights on Frank Chodorov.
Till next time.